This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the back Zurhaar, he backs it, he kicks it, all the floor from Zurhaar. This is the speed of McKercher, 3 bounces down the wing, he keeps going, 4 bounces. Joining the chorus, the Can't Lose Kangas, AFLW Premiers.
Hello, welcome back. Sorry that you're here, jeepers. What a poor performance against the Cats. Oh, it's going to be a tough one to record. I think it was certainly a tough one to watch. What do you say after a game like that? I think, there's always going to be these bumps in the road, but I think particularly given how long the rebuild's been, a game like this does really hurt. So really, really tough game against the Cats. We'll obviously unpack it. We'll talk about it. We'll try and keep things as light as possible, but not a lot of positives to take out of that performance. Certainly not a lot to get excited about. A few things that we can touch on. I did get to the game, which, yay for me, I guess. Not the sort of game that you want to be sitting in your seat for, but, look, it's one of those things, unfortunately. We're going to have these games. We had a lot of players, well, not a lot. We had some important players out. Sherry and Larkey are certainly significant for our structure. I think Wardlaw does make a bit of a difference in the middle there, but, we're talking about a difference of maybe 20, 30, 40 points. It was still always going to be a thrashing, even if you insert a couple of those important players. So let's jump in. Let's not dwell any more than we need to. Let's jump into review. Team selections first up, and three changes for this game. Out went Cooper Harvey with illness, so hopefully he'll be able to come straight back in next week. I think we've seen over the past couple of weeks he does have some goal scoring ability at the highest level, so I think we'd like to see a little bit more of that before the season's up, so we can make a decision on him. Kel Coleman-Jones, unfortunately, with that calf injury, also out, and then Will Phillips omitted. So, look, you do wonder if that's career over for Will Phil. There's 4 more games left for the year. Wardlaw, you would expect. I mean, I thought he was going to come back in this week, to be honest. He didn't make it back in for this week, but you'd probably think he's going to get back in. It's hard to see where Will Phil is going to fit into this side over the last 4 weeks of the year. Brought up 50 games last week, which is nice, but if he's being omitted, given what's going on in the middle of the ground and the players that we have available, I think he's probably in some trouble, and obviously coming out of contract this year. And coming in, Robert Hansen Jr., Zane Dersma, and Finbar Maley. Obviously, Maley into to be that second ruck alongside Bryn Teakle. Robert Hansen Jr. came in as the sub, which meant that Zach Banch was able to play his first full game of football, although he played most of that game last week against the Swans anyway, given Kel Coleman-Jones' early injury. And then we saw Zane Dersma come in and essentially play off half-back, which is a role he's been experimented with in the VFL a little bit of late, so that's the role that he came in. He was playing mostly behind the footy, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about that as the game review goes on. Looking at the score, it's probably not one that we want to dwell too much on. 7-7-49 North Melbourne, 22-18, 150 the Cats, so a 101-point shellacking. I was sitting with my mate Glenn, and we went to the 2007 qualifying final. If anyone remembers that game, it was an absolute horrific belting, Geelong versus North Melbourne as well. That was 106 points we looked up during the game. There was a bit of a let's see if North Melbourne can keep it under 100, or let's see if we can hit it bang on the score from that game. And it was actually extremely close. That game was 50 North Melbourne, 156 the Cats, I think. In any case, it was 106 points. So, given how well the game was going, that was where we were at in the last quarter. We were seeing if we could have a bit of a repeat of that game. Wasn't quite to be, and we weren't able to keep that margin under 100. We did win the last quarter. So I guess that's something. Certainly not something I'd be too excited about, but it is something. But yeah, just a shocking game. The Cats really, should have been well out in front a lot earlier. Their kicking was inaccurate in that first half, which is what kept it sort of half respectable up until sort of late in that second quarter where things got out of control. Obviously, eventually 22-18 doesn't look too bad, but they did kick a lot more accurately in the second half of the game. And I guess let's go through it. We started with Dawson, Pink and Logan in the back half and Chom in the forward half again. So similar to how we structured up at the start of the Sydney game. Logue was playing on Jeremy Cameron at least as that primary assignment, but there was a lot of swapping and changing. Patrick Dangerfield in that Cats forward line is a bit of a tough matchup, so Toby Pink was spending some time on him, but then there was obviously some rotations happening. And I thought the first couple of minutes looked okay. We were relatively competitive early on. But I think there was some early warning signs. We conceded a 50-metre penalty on the wing, and Jeremy Cameron just no one near him as he waltzed up, gets the handball receiving, and kicks the goal from approximately 50 with absolutely zero pressure on him. And that continued throughout the game. There was no one went near Jeremy Cameron for large chunks. That's why he was able to kick 11 goals in the end. It was Buddy Franklin down in Tassie-esque nearly. We're headed that direction at one point. I think he kicked 11 goals. One might have missed a couple of opportunities out on the full or didn't make the distance as well. So he had an absolute field day, Jeremy Cameron, and that was the start of it. I think he kicked the Cats' first 3 goals. And whilst that first quarter we were a bit more competitive, you could see the early warning signs that Jeremy Cameron was going to get off the chain. Like I mentioned, Dersma was playing behind the ball, and I think we saw him deliver a couple of nice kicks. One of those inside 50 that hit Paul Curtis deep for our first goal of the game. So that was a nice start for him. And, like I said, we did start relatively competitively. We even took the lead for a brief period in the first quarter. But unfortunately, like I said, Jeremy Cameron had 3 in 15 minutes and was doing it without really anyone standing near him. It was, that I think should have been the early warning sign that things were not going to go well. Zach Banch was, unfortunately used as a stepladder in game 2. It's not ideal kicking the ball high to him. I think we did that 3 or 4 times in this game where we went for a long high kick to Zach Banch, and he's sort of Boomer Harvey height. He's very small and he was thoroughly outmarked and out-heighted a couple of times, which I just don't know why we're doing that to a second gamer. Really showed our ability to make good decisions, I guess, unfortunately, and just plenty of errors exiting defensive 50. That was my main concern in the first quarter. Whilst we weren't necessarily leaking goals, the Cats were kicking a lot of points and we just were not able to get it out of defensive 50 and transition the footy. Geelong was missing shots, which kept us in it, but holistically speaking, they were finding targets inside 50 way more easily than us. They had some really nice movement patterns across the ground and just were far superior to the way that we were moving the footy. So whilst the score at quarter time wasn't absolutely damning, it certainly did. The scoring shots, I guess, spoke to how things were going. I'm just pulling that up whilst I'm chatting. At quarter time, the score was 14-30, but it was 2 goals 2 to 4 goals 6. And then, it was all downhill from there. Unfortunately, it was a 7-goal-1 second quarter, and even then the Cats kicked another 4 points in that quarter. So, second quarter, like I said, things got out of control. I thought Pink was playing a good game. He had a couple of nice moments. He did a really good job of keeping the footy in front. Attacked it hard, but didn't allow the ball to get past him. Had a really nice tackle in the defensive 50, or a goal-saving tackle where he got a player from the blind side after there'd been several forward hand passes. So that was a nice goal-saving moment. Had a couple of really nice moments. Toby Pink had another one late that I'll talk about. But just continued our awful transition kicking. We turned it over far too many times, making far too many mistakes, and just the Cats were really keeping us in it halfway through the second quarter with their really bad kicking. It was, there was, I guess, at no point did I think we were going to win the game, but I did halfway through the second quarter wonder if it was going to be a close game just because the Cats were going to rue these missed opportunities and, we were going to be able to make something of it. Certainly was not the case as the second quarter went on. That they did finally find their kicking boots and were able to pile on the goals in the second half of this second quarter. There was a moment where Luke Parker received a looping hand pass. I should have gone back and had a look at who gave him that hand pass, but it was an absolute hospital hand pass, a really high one in the middle of the ground. And I just couldn't help but think he must have been thinking as that he was waiting for that ball to come down, why why did I leave the Swans? The Swans are not in a much better position ladder-wise, but I can't help but think that throughout this game, he must have been questioning his decision-making because, boy, he was sort of the lone hand in that midfield. Ended up with 31 touches, Luke Parker, and tried his guts out all night. Nearly kicked a goal late, which would have been a really nice moment for him. But yeah, he must have been at some point thinking, who's coming with me? Who's actually going to try to compete in this game? But yeah, that hand pass to him was a low moment. It was out to 42 points, and then it got out even further. Somehow we lost a loose ball at half-back. It looked as though we were a 50-50 chance at kicking a goal, and then somehow Jeremy Cameron's free inside 50 deep for an easy goal. Zurhaar was able to kick one very late in the second quarter. Charlie Comber nearly gave away a free kick in the square, which would have just been, look, obviously it wouldn't have mattered in the context of the game really, but it would have been a backbreaker if we've finally kicked a goal and then Chom gives away a goal in the goal square. It's one of my pet peeves, to be honest, the extent to which you can just get away with absolute murder in the goal square on the goal line if the ball's sailing just over. It's not something that I enjoy about the game. I think it should be just like any other contest. You shouldn't be able to absolutely maul a player, or in this case Chom he bumped the Geelong player, I think it was De Koning, without, De Koning Chom didn't have any capacity or any desire to get the footy. Now, obviously, it was going through for a goal, so that makes sense, but it was a bump off the ball, essentially. So, look, I was happy to get away with that one, but holistically, I would love to see that adjudicated a little bit differently. I think I'm not really too sure why the goal line is adjudicated differently. In any case, we got the goal, and we went into half-time 54 points down, and the game was done at that point. 54-point margin. Nothing's changing, or nothing's getting better for us, and it certainly didn't. The third quarter was the worst of the lot. It was an 8-0-0. We kicked 1 point in that third quarter, so an absolute demolition. They got the margin out to 106 points at three-quarter time, so a horrific quarter of football to watch. Not a lot of positives at all, not a lot of notes that I made, because what point was there? I thought the Cats started the quarter with an end-to-end defensive 50 transition for a goal, and that sort of summed up the way the quarter went. There wasn't a lot of pressure applied. The Cats just kept hitting targets. We weren't able to corral or pressure them with any kind of vigour. I don't think there was any point where the Cats really looked like they were struggling to transition. It just looked like they were having a training drill at times. It was pretty embarrassing. They just waltzed inside 50 and found targets. Shannon Neal ended up with 4 and was taking marks on the lead for fun. Obviously, Jeremy Cameron was kicking him, and I thought it looked like a game absolutely devoid of any contest, of any want to defend. I don't think, looking at our players emotionally, I don't think that they gave up in terms of they checked out. I just think they completely lost the belief that they were able to influence the game positively, is kind of how I would summarise it. I don't think that they thought that they could do anything about it. Chom eventually late in that third quarter was swung back. Thank goodness for that. They made the swap with Will Dawson, probably a little bit too late, but similar to the Swans game, it looks like we're trying to persist with having Chom forward to see what it looks like, and then when it's all going pear-shaped, we swing him back, and almost as soon as he went back there, he took an intercept mark and looked a different player. But yeah, like I said, 106-point margin at three-quarter time. We were able to win the last quarter. There's a little positive for you. It was 4-2 to 3-3, I think. Yeah, a slight win in that last quarter, but unfortunately still a 101-point walloping. The fact that we were able to kick 4 goals in the last quarter, I guess, is a positive, but the game was absolutely done. Any of the energy and the contest had really dissipated out of the game. It wasn't one. It wasn't looking super positive, but sure, I guess we could say we were able to put 26 points on the scoreboard, and we'd only had 23 to three-quarter time. So you can take the positives out of that if you'd like. We experimented a little bit. We saw Sullivan in the middle. Like I said, Will Dawson went forward again. Charlie Comber took a really nice intercept mark, and then just one of his absolute painted shanks kicks across goal that we conceded a shocking goal in that one. Like that's the thing that hurts about Chom. He does 80 or 90% of that stuff really well in defensive defensive 50, had a couple of really good intercept marks and a couple of really good spoils where he got across as a third man. I thought his physicality in the back half was really strong, but then he just lets himself down with his kicking at times and his decision making when he does have the footy. That being said, I don't think that he provided much at all in the front half. So it's a tough one, but I certainly would prefer to see him in the back half at this stage. I think, for me, I'll talk about it in a minute, but I think I'd prefer just to see him in the back half next year, or let's properly train him up to be a forward and get him back in that mindset. Anyway, I'm not. We saw another moment where he kicked it long to Zach Banch and he was outmarked. I mentioned that in the first quarter. It's not the sort of game where I'm going to be judging Zach Banch's performance, because how do you compete and show your skills at a game like this? But we made life way harder than it needed to be for him, that's for sure, because like I said, he was used a step ladder early and then we just kept kicking it long and high to him. I don't know, I can't think of why we would be doing that. I just think we were looking for an option and he looked like an option. But yeah, that's about all I have in terms of notes from the actual game. It's not one that I wanted to go over with a fine-tooth comb. This jersey is not one that I'm a huge fan of, and now that I've watched us play this way and that in this jersey, I do not want to see this again. It was just a horrible performance. I'm going to definitely associate this jersey with the performance. So let's retire that one. I know it's we've had some centenary celebrations with it, which is fantastic. Let's move on from this jersey, because boy, that was a really, really poor, tough performance to watch, and a shame. I was able to get to the footy, which was great, and to see this kind of performance was not what any of us were wanting to see. I think there's obviously been plenty of chatter on social media and plenty of disappointment around how this season's ending. We had such a strong patch in the middle part of the year. I thought we started slow, and I did think we were going to start slow. I thought the second half of the year was going to be much, much stronger. I think in the middle part we were looking, that things are looking good, but the last month or so has been pretty dejecting, really, and making it pretty tough to get excited to watch this football team, which is not how we all want to feel. Anyway, that's the game summary. 101 point losers, the first 100-point margin for the year, I believe. So it's a nice record to get. That's not just for us. I think it's the first 100-point margin in any AFL game this year. So yay for us, I suppose. Let's look ahead. Look, not a lot to talk about here in story of the game. The inside 50 count, I think, is the big one. 36 inside 50s to 77 speaks to the territory dominance and the transition dominance that the Cats had. They just moved the footy a million times better than we were able to, and once they got it inside 50, we found it really hard to transition, and so many times we would get away. We'd find our way not out the back, but in some space, and because we had to press up so high to give those options, we had nothing to go to. So at times you saw us going sideways, and it looked like frustrating. Why aren't you kicking it down the line? In general, it would be because the Cats had 4 players in better positions than our players to mark the next kick. So we had to actually, go sideways and hope we can get the ball through the middle and then make something happen. Yeah, the Cats just transitioned the ball for fun. We found ways to turn it over. I think we've seen that plenty of times before. And I think after competing okay in the first term, it just fell apart. Cameron kicks 11. Smith has 43 touches. And their entries just consistently hit targets inside 50. Shannon Neal was marking it really well. Obviously, Cameron was marking it and finding plenty of the footy. And our structure ahead of the footy left a lot to be desired. It's tough to assess with Nick Larkey out, just exactly, what isn't working besides everything. But, it's I guess what I'm saying is obviously Larkey is a real focal point for us, and having him there changed a lot of things about the way the forward line looks. But Charlie Comben up front has not worked the last couple of weeks. I understand it. With Larkey out, you need someone with some presence, and in the back line, Chom does a great job of that. But it's an entirely different thing, that leading pattern up forward for someone like Chom. I think he's definitely better suited to being second fiddle, and at the moment it's like Jack Darling wants to be second fiddle, Charlie Comben wants to be second fiddle, Cam Zurhaar wants to be third fiddle, and we don't have that number one option. All of that being said, the forward structure being fixed wouldn't have changed too much about the result of this game because we weren't able to get it inside 50 enough. Like I said, we lost the inside 50 count by 41, but I think the leading patterns of Chom as a forward are out of kilter. I think it's the sort of thing where if he is going to be played forward, I think he really does need to spend a lot of time, or at least some time, playing forward in the VFL again, just to find his confidence as a forward. He reads the game really well in the back half. That's what he's been doing well for the past 18 to 24 months. But I understand this experimentation with Larky out of the team and also the season just absolutely shot. I understand that. The experimentation. I'm not mad about the experimentation, but I am disappointed with how well it's going and what it's looking like. So, look, it is difficult to judge the forward line overall in a game like this where the ball just didn't get there anywhere near often enough. So I want to put that on the table, but I think we would like to see more from Charlie Comben in his roll-up forward, given he's played the best part of 6 quarters there over the past 2 games and hasn't really been able to make much of an impact. And in his 2 and a bit quarters in the back half, he's been able to make much more of an impact. We've seen him intercept marking. We've seen him impacting the game. And obviously part of that is the opposition takes a little while to adjust to the fact that he's been swung back and they've got to then decide what they're going to do about it. So, you can kind of get 5 or 10 minutes of surprising the opposition in that role. But he's obviously just much more of a natural player there. So, look, not a lot of, high-grade analysis here. It's an absolute just domination in the midfield and transitioning and disposals and all those things. They were just a far more effective team. I think it probably is a little bit simplistic to just say they're a more mature, well-rounded team, but they are. I think that's definitely a part of it. They've got a lot of good middle-aged players that are coming into their prime. Max Holmes is fantastic in that running midfielder role. Bailey Smith, you can't say, he's just such an enigma. Sometimes his disposal's not amazing, but he knows how to find the footy. He's pretty good in tight and for the most part was really damaging in this game. I'll talk about him in a little bit more detail later on. So the Cats just far too good, but we have a lot of work to do in terms of the way that we set up defensively and the way that we want to move the ball. And I think if you've been listening to me for the past 3 years, if you've been watching North Melbourne play for the past 4 or 5 years, that's been the case the entire time. It's a little bit worrying that we're still talking about these same things, unfortunately, particularly given that I thought in that middle part of the year the defensive structures were looking much improved. I definitely wouldn't be saying that right now. Shinboner of the week and North Podium voting time, and there was definitely a point where I just wondered, do I skip this segment altogether and no one's Shinboner of the week and there are no votes? I slept on that and I thought, no, there's probably a few that are worthy of a vote, and I think Toby Pink, with all the context of this game considered, he absolutely deserves some accolades. I spoke about his goal-saving tackle in the first half, which was a fantastic effort. He battled hard all night. In particular, the way that he attacked the footy and kept it in front, I mentioned that. And he also had a really nice moment in the second half, must have been the third quarter, where he ran back with the flight. Jeremy Cameron had gotten out in the back for the millionth time. The ball was coming in long and high to him, and Toby Pink just sprinted desperately to get to that contest. He makes the contest, makes a bit of a spoil, or at least a body spoil, which means that Cameron doesn't take the mark. Then Pink needs to change direction really quickly. He slips over, but Jeremy Cameron fumbles the footy a little bit. And so what it meant eventually was that Toby Pink saved, what would have been a certain goal. I've got no doubt that the Cats kicked a goal soon after that anyway. But, I think the fact that he was able to be so desperate to get back there and make a contest and stop at least Cameron from kicking the goal in that moment was, a showcase and a testament to how desperate Toby Pink was the entire night. I think he was the only genuine, legitimate defender there that could hold his head up high. He had a really good night. Will Dawson was having a tough night, and I don't judge him. He's still early in his career, so I'm not sitting in judgment of him, but he was having a tough night. He was getting outmarked and outplayed consistently. And I think, Pink, who was switching onto lots of different players throughout the game, whilst he was still beaten at times, tried his guts out, I thought, did his absolute best to save some face and save some goals. Like I mentioned, spent some time on Dangerfield and on Cameron, rotated through others, but I think, he definitely, for me, had to be Shinboner of the week. He could hold his head high. He does get one vote for his game. So I guess to summarise his stats, 15 disposals, 6 marks, one of those contested, 8 intercepts, and I think, a solid game in an otherwise really, really tough defensive group to play alongside. And midfielders didn't make it any easier for him. So one vote to Pink, and he also gets Shinboner of the week. The other one vote getters, because no one got a 3 or a 4 or a 2. These are players that I think played their roles or played close enough to their roles to receive a vote. Luke Parker, I mentioned, he was really the lone hand in that midfield. 31 disposals, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 7 clearances, about 500 metres gained, 3 inside 50, 6 score involvements, which was the equal most for North Melbourne. And I think, he tried his guts out all game. Nearly kicked a goal late, which would have been a nice cherry on top for his game. I mentioned the hospital hand pass he received. There was a fair bit of that where he was one out, trying his best, and must have just thought, what am I doing here? Because he found himself outnumbered and outmaneuvered lots of times, but did not didn't stop trying. And I think this is why we got him across, because he's such a consistent player. He provides this even when everything's going poorly. Players around him are falling and not delivering. I think the fact that he was able to still find the footy 31 times and try his best at centre bounces was, a testament to his work rate. So one to Lukey Parker, one to Cold McKercher, 32 disposals, 6 marks, about 500 metres gained, went at 81% disposal effectiveness. Played his role, tried his best, wasn't able to deliver a lot of transition, but found enough of the footy off halfback on that wing to say that he's played his role. Not one of those games that you saw him, bouncing his way down the wing and slicing up the opposition, but did try his best and was the best defensive distributor. Caleb Daniel really struggled in that role. Riley Harden was okay, but probably missed targets a couple too many times. And Zane Dersma, still finding his feet in that role, was good in moments, but is more of a distributor, more of a hand passer to get it into the hands of the likes of Daniel and McKercher. He was really quick with his hands, Zane Dersma, and he was good at making quick decisions. But in terms of moving the ball forward and trying to get that transition going, that was McKercher's go. So one vote to him. In the front half, Cam Zurhaar, I think, deserves a vote, kicking 3 goals, 1 with the sort of service that he had. I think is worthy of a vote. 3 goals, 1, 10 disposals, 3 marks, 2 of those contested. 4 inside 50s, tried his absolute guts out. Didn't get a lot of the footy because of the 36 inside 50s, but made the most of his opportunities with those 3 goals. Paul Curtis wasn't far behind him with 2 goals, but I just think Zurhaar was the best of our forwards easily and deserving of the 1 vote. And then I was going to leave it there, but I think it's worth mentioning Bryn Teakle. 13 disposals, 29 hit-outs, 9 to advantage, 7 clearances. Played his role. It was certainly not a Tristan Sherry level of impact. He did have the most hit-outs on the ground, but Geelong won the hit-out battle because they had a more even spread with their rucks. Maley only went in there a little bit, had a couple of hit-outs, but Teakle spent a lot of the game in there. And I think, he evened things out there in the ruck. Like I said, 29 hit-outs was the most on the ground, 9 hit-outs to advantage, and he was able to win 7 clearances. Now, were they clean clearances that got the ball going significantly our way? Probably not, but I think he held his own in there. He's undersized. He's not supposed to be, a primary ruck at AFL level, and I think, we could say that he wasn't the reason we lost this game. So, Bryn Teakle 1 vote. To summarise that, Parker, McKercher, Pink, Zurhaar and Teakle are our 1 vote getters in this game. And I think, I haven't gone and had a look, but this would, I'm sure, have to be the lowest voting game that I've had this year, which you would expect in a 100-point drubbing, but definitely not what we're wanting to have happen this late in the year. In terms of what the standings look like, it's actually mildly interesting, which is ironic given the performance. But Sherry and Sheasel still equal top 20, and an equal second place LDU and Parker, and an equal third place Curtis and McKercher on 14 votes. LDU and Parker on 17. I don't recall if I mentioned that. So behind them, Powell and Zurhaar on 13, Lucky and Simpkin 12. Just a lot of ties down the top half of the podium. So still those top 6, really, I think anyone from them could win it. Obviously, Sherry's going to miss 1 more game, so Sheasel's still got some more opportunity to potentially go past him before Sherry returns. But yeah, 4 games to go. I wish I could be more excited about that, but our performances the last couple of weeks is making it a little bit difficult to be too concerned with, my North Podium voting. But that's how it's looking right now. Like I said, with 4 games to go. Would like to take this opportunity just to thank anyone for listening this far into the podcast. If you've been watching North Melbourne play the last few weeks, it's probably not what you want to be doing is thinking about more footy and listening to content about footy. So I do appreciate it if you have made it this far. I'd appreciate if you could share the podcast out with any other North Melbourne fans that you know. I've had a couple of new listeners recently and followers, which has been fantastic to see. So I do appreciate everyone that does that. You can support the show by subscribing on your chosen podcast service. You can get involved with me on my social accounts at NorthPod Show. And if you would like to support the show in an additional way, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Kanga clipboard time, and not a lot of positivity here, as you might expect, but a few things to touch on. I think for me, the biggest disappointment coming out of this game is letting the opposition players do what they're capable of doing. That's the biggest issue for me. I understand that star players are star players because they're hard to stop, but I think when Jeremy Cameron is just walking around on his own for large chunks of the game, you have to question what the game plan, around him was, and whether or not the game plan just fell apart, whether or not players weren't fulfilling their role effectively on him. I'm not too sure, but Griffin Logue appeared to be the primary matchup early in the game, and I don't know if Griffin Logue at any point touched or laid hands on Jeremy Cameron, which is, a bit of a concern. Like I mentioned, Cameron kicked 3 goals early on. That's not a great start, and he ends with 11. Obviously, not all of that was spent primarily on Logue, but Logue is the senior, experienced, and supposed to be the stronger defender in that back half. He was just embarrassed, to be honest, absolutely torched. As a team we were, but we needed to be far more aware of Jeremy Cameron. Like I mentioned, his first goal, he just waltzes past from 50 metres unmarked and kicks a goal. He found himself free at stoppages far too often. So, that's pretty disappointing. You know that Jeremy Cameron's a super dangerous player. Stand next to him, do something. That's disappointing. Similarly, Bailey Smith in the midfield just did as he liked at stoppages. 43 disposals, kicked a goal, 13 clearances, 8 inside 50s. You know what he's going to do. Just stand next to him. Put an arm across him. I think at far too many times at stoppages, we would stand next to him, and then as soon as the ball went up, he moved one way and our player went the other. Whether that was Simpkin, whether that was LDU, there were plenty of matchups. Parker at times, Powell, all of our midfielders, for whatever reason, if a player is finding that much of the footy, follow them and the footy will find you. That I guess is my frustration, is neither of those players did anything that you wouldn't expect them to do. Neither of them did anything absolutely crazy and you just go, oh my goodness, we couldn't stop that. They just played good games and consistently found the football and consistently damaged us. So that hurts. That I think is the most disappointing thing for me. It's hard to attribute blame, but I can't help but think the coaching group needed to adjust to that throughout the game. Maybe there were some plans that weren't executed adequately before the game, but you can't tell me that we went in not knowing that Jeremy Cameron's going to be dangerous, particularly in the front half, and you can't tell me that we didn't come into this game knowing that Bailey Smith is going to find the footy at stoppage. If he's been able to do one thing this year, it's get clearances. So that is a massive concern. Bar Parker, I just didn't think the senior players stood up when the whips were cracking. Griffin Logue, I don't think should play again this year. I generally am not too vindictive. I think I'm a pretty supportive, players first kind of guy. I understand that they're humans and, this is their job and they're trying their best. I get all that, but I think the last couple of weeks from Griffin Logue has been for me enough to say, let's not see him this year. Let's see who else. Can we get Matt Whitlock in? I'd love to see Josh Goder if he's ready to play footy this year. I understand that you'd want to be, conservative with him, but Griffin Logue for me is just woefully out of form and not not performing at AFL standards, unfortunately. I really feel like I was a supporter of him. I've stood by him for a while, but I can't do that based on the past couple of weeks. And the defence did look for a little while really good without him. So I understand why he's come back in. We've had injuries to Aiden Core, and we've had some unavailability back there, but I think it's time to let's move Tron back there and let's get Griffin Logue out of the side. Jai Simpkin, disappointing as captain, probably a specific moment. He was outmarked in that last quarter, deep inside defensive 50. I don't know how he didn't get a spoil on that footy. It might have been Lawson that took the mark, but one way or another, you've got to find a way to get a fist on that football. He had a really disappointing game, and played well last week. So he's allowed to have a bad week. He's been a bit up and down this year, but that was a disappointing game, a disappointing moment from Simpkin. LDU, 0 impact. I think he had 21 disposals, so he found a bit of the ball, but you're going to find a bit of the footy when you're around it that much. I don't think that he influenced this game at all. So again, a senior player on a lot of money that didn't deliver in this one. And Caleb Daniel, again, I feel like I've been relatively supportive of him, but I found it really hard to support him. I know that's a tough role, kicking out from halfback and finding options, but he looks lost at the moment back there. I'd like to see him moved up the ground a little bit more, because he's just unable to get any drive and transition going. And he looks lost. He did go in for 1 centre bounce attendance at one point. I'm not sure if that was just a bit of we're short a player get in there, or if we were trying to swing him into the more of the midfield just to see what he can do up there. But I do think we need to see him further up the ground, because having him as that deepest distributor is not working at the moment. And again, he's a senior player, so I guess when you go through that list, there aren't a heap of senior players playing in this game, due to injuries. Obviously, Luke McDonald out, Aiden Core's out, Tristan Sherry's out. There's a couple of others. Even then, to have Luke Parker as the only, I guess I should say, like Jack Darling and Cam Zurhaar, I would call them senior players, but the ball just didn't get down to them very often. Darling kicked a goal and took a couple of nice marks. I mentioned Zurhaar. I think he played his role, but it's hard for them to influence the game from their position on the ground. So I guess I'm more speaking to the players that were around the footy a lot. And I think Parker, of that group, Parker, Logue, Simpkin, LDU, and Daniel, Parker is the only one that I thought really stood up and played his role effectively, which is why we were in the position that we're in as 100-point losers. I guess I've spoken a couple of times about the positional shifts happening and that we saw in the game, and I hope that we're learning plenty from them, because a lot of it wasn't working. For me, I think I spoke about it earlier on. Chom as a forward, for me, is a bit of a non-starter. He needs to go back and learn how to play forward line properly, and maybe we try that more when Larky's back in the team, because the last 2 games he's just looked lost. He's not able to get any separation. He's not able to, put himself in dangerous positions. Again, it's hard to judge him completely given the entries and the possessions that we've had, but it hasn't been good. I think we need to stick with him in defence at the moment, because at least he's able to positively impact the game in that role. We saw Fino Sullivan go in for some centre bounces, which I think is good. Great for his development. Very happy with that in bursts. I don't want to see him there full time, but he does have an ability to find space where there isn't much. And so I think playing him through the midfield is a good swap for him. I think eventually that's where we hope he'll end up. It's where a lot of good juniors have played most of their footy is through the midfield, and I think whilst he's been a good player for us off halfback and through that wing, I think holistically in the next couple of years we want to move him into that midfield. So to give him a few reps in there, I think was good. The Dersmer at halfback is a tough one though. That's one I want to spend a little bit more time talking about, because whilst I think he showed some positive signs back there, was really clean and made some quick decisions when he did find the footy. For me, it's a bit of what's he doing there? Because I think if that's his role, really how excited are we? I know there's been some talk about him being disgruntled and maybe wanting out. He is still contracted for 1 more year on the back of him being a high draft pick. So we've got him locked up for 1 more year, but there's talk that he's a bit disgruntled and wanting to leave. Yeah, I don't know. Like, his talents, marking is a really good high mark. And he's got that kind of hybrid ability where he can play tall, he can play small, he can play through the middle. But is a halfback distributor really, really the best use for him long term? And if it is, like, what kind of player have we really got? I guess that's my concern. We saw him taking some really nice, confident, high-flying marks early in his career or early in his first season, and then things did seem to change for him, and he hasn't been able to recreate that form. He was able to kick goals early on, and he hasn't really found that or had that capacity so much more recently. But yeah, I'm okay with it if it's about getting him some touches and getting him some confidence. I'm okay with that, but long term, I don't really want to see him in this role. I would much prefer to see him in a more attacking front half or even midfield kind of role if he's able to find his feet in those roles. So let's hope, and I'm hoping that's more of a chance to get him some exposure to the footy and find some confidence. Because next year, if he is still on the list, which I hope he is, I hope he's playing in that more front half role and in that more dangerous position for a player of his skills, allegedly, I guess. Final point here. I think this is kind of stating the obvious, but it's crunch time for some of those uncontracted players now. With Phillips being omitted, his papers are probably stamped. You'd think CCJ, it's going to be tough for him now to get another contract again. Really unfortunate that he's found himself injured, but I do think it's going to be tough for him to find another gig. Cooper Harvey, I think he's a good chance to get another year, particularly if he's able to get back in for another game or two this year and kick some more goals. I think he's more. I'm a bit more positive on him, but you never know. He was very lucky to get a contract this year. Eddie Ford looks like he can't get a game. I wouldn't expect him to get a contract. Same with Callum Dawson. The two of them really look like they're on the outer. Darcy Tucker is an interesting one. Prior to his back injury, he was getting a game, so whether we give him a 1-year deal and hope that he can provide, a bit of maturity and, something through the middle part of through next year, we'll see. But, he's touch and go for me. Geordie Payne's not able to get a game as that mid-season recruit. That's an interesting one. And Miller Bergman, again, seems unlikely. He's done his ACL and he was on the outer before that. So it's hard to see him getting recontracted. I think, there's just some of those players. For me, with 4 games to go, it's a bit depressing how many of these players are still on the list that we need to turn over and regenerate. This is supposed to be a time where, we're starting to shoot up the ladder and we're seeing our players really develop and come into themselves as players. That the fact that we've still got so many of these players that really aren't providing for us and are not filling us with excitement, I think is really tough. So hopefully we can see something from some of those players in the last month that does excite us and gives us some hope for the future. But it looks as though there's going to be a fair bit of turnover at the end of this year again, which is it's important for development, but it's not what we hoped would be happening. And final segment around Arden Street. Don't have much to talk about from the VFL as I'm recording this before that game, but we are playing Geelong and Arden Street. That will have no doubt happened by the time you are listening to this, so you can catch up on that one. Hopefully, what I'm hoping to see is the likes of Goda, Whitlock, Wardlaw, Goad, Urquhart showing a bit. We'd love to see some of those play some AFL footy before the end of the year, particularly Wardlaw. You'd like to get him a few games and find some more confidence at AFL level before the season's out. Goda, I'd like to see if he's ready. I don't know if he will be. And Whitlock, I just think it was a bit rough bringing him in for that one game and then dropping him. I'd like to see him get a game or two, given how poorly things are going. Let's give him a little bit more of exposure. I'm done with Griffin Logue this year. Maybe Whitlock could come in for him, for example. So hopefully we see some positive performances from them in the VFL. In terms of any other news, the AFLW had their first match sim during the week, late in the week. Lost to the Dogs in pretty shocking, putrid conditions, but hopefully that's just a tune-up. We know the girls are going to be primed for a premiership defence, so I'm not reading too much into that at this stage. The conditions were pretty awful, and obviously it's just a chance to try a few things. There were certainly plenty of players that were debuting for North Melbourne in terms of real AFLW exposure. So their season's going to be underway shortly. They'll have a practice match in a week or two, and then the season will be not too far away, which is exciting. But a loss first up in match sim for them. And then, looking ahead to next week, what felt like a very winnable game up until the last 48 hours or so against the Saints is now one that you look at and go, by golly, we've got to compete. We've got to show something. Because if we get beaten thoroughly by the Saints, that's when I think some real pressure is going to come on senior people around the club, and that's not what we want. I think that's going to happen this week anyway. Sunday. Clarko is going to be talked about. I think the senior players of the club are going to be talked about, and that's fair and reasonable, but we need to respond against the Saints. We've got to at least compete and give them a red-hot crack. I'd love to win this game. Would I love to win this game, but in any case, it's not going to be easy with Sherry still out. He's going to miss one more, which is tough. Hopefully someone like Larky and Wardlaw can come back in and help us compete. But it's tough to find things to be positive about at this point in the year. I didn't mention it. It's Sunday, August 3, Marvel Stadium, 1:45, or 1:40, I think. So it's that first Sunday afternoon game. We're certainly not going in as favourites. We wouldn't have been going in as favourites anyway, but I think it's fair to say that our form recently means that we're less favoured than we would have been. Like I said, we've just got to compete. The Saints are in not great form. They're towards the bottom of the ladder. They're sitting 15th as I'm talking right now. They were one that we could have leapfrogged if we'd beaten Melbourne like we should have a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully we can put up a better performance. Hopefully the players are absolutely stinging. Hopefully they're able to wash this one off them and play a much better game next week against the Saints. We've got this and we've got the Tigers across the last few weeks that you'd really love to win, or at the very least compete and win one of them. I would have much preferred to be talking about winning two of them, but at this point I'll take one win because the form over the past little while is not looking good. Anyway, really appreciate it if you've made it this far through the podcast. I know it's a rubbish feeling watching a game like that or having to, exist in a time where that kind of game is happening. I'm hopeful that this is the lowest point for the season and we can finish a little bit more strongly. I'm happy to see a little bit more experimentation when things aren't going well, but let's hope that those experiments work a little bit better because this was not the game for us. That's going to do it for the podcast. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for listening to this therapy session. Hopefully you've got something out of it. If you do have anything positive from this game, feel free to drop it in the comments and we can chat about what was positive, but good luck finding it. I will no doubt speak to you soon after that Saints game. Have a fantastic week, and as hard as it is to say right now, go on. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.